we already have some questions coming in. I got the first question came in from Ivan, and it's a great question. Because I think when we talk about scenarios, people think about, kind of deterministic features or factors. Hey, lead time, here's my demand, here's this. And there's none of it that are really, truly a number. One of them is forecasting. Bringing in forecasting into the uncertainty of it's not going to be this, it's going to be this or this or this or this. How do you bring that into scenario? I want to start with you, Todd, kind of framing out that question. We have a lot of, unknowns in what we're going to sell 3 months from now. How do you bring that traditionally into some type of scenario planning, into an S&OP process, into decision making? How do you bring, different types of ranges of forecasting?
Yeah, when I think about my experience working with a a store-centric business, which kind of ties into what Dr. Shah's example here is, I mean, that forecast is, as you know, we work on a 6 to 9 month lead time typically, meaning if I ordered a pair from my factory today, I could get it into my warehouse in 6 to 9 months. So we're making a demand call that far out. And we're doing it at an item level. Now in footwear, it's really complicated, even more so than I think than what we've talked about so far, in that you're talking about a size level. A size level is a true SKU, right? So predicting that style, color, that thing that's on your foot is not easy, but it's easier than trying to understand the absolute size level of the business. So typically what we do is when you think about a forecast process, you're still in that 6 to 9 month horizon. This is where people come in, and you've got merchants typically that are choosing the product and selecting the product, and they need planners sitting next to them to help guide them on the number side of the product to make sure that, well, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Sliced bread came around once. I don't think so. Let's talk about how I, put grade into numbers. Coming up with that forecast and then pulling that in, usually depends on how big your footprint is in terms of your store counts, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to allocate product to those stores. If you're just a one store, that's not as complicated, obviously, as if you've got 1,000 stores, which a lot of the people that I deal with have that many. So the forecast typically tends to be done more in a product-centric way, but then you very quickly need to say, okay, but whether it's region, store clusters, and then you blow it down into lower levels, you start to say, okay, well, this particular door is going to do so much volume. Use your history, use your experience to understand what that could look like, and then you want to make sure you're like doing the math and the numbers and all that's half of your job as a planner in this business. Then you need to pivot over and do the collaboration thing. Talk to the merchants, talk to the store operations, make sure you understand, hey, what, these are really performing, but guess what, our competitor across the street has something very similar, so we might want to be thinking about how do we adjust or modify. So once you get past the point of no return of calling your forecast and your inbound supply is baked, then of course you need to start saying, all right, well, I have flexibility on where I send it across my stores. If I'm not doing so well in the Northeast, can I send it to the Southeast? Weather comes into play, so many different factors. So you need to have that kind of pivot from a product centric to a real time, what's going on the ground in the marketplace, planning and execution. It's more execution typically.
So Joe, going to you, almost the same question. It's how do you bring in the uncertainty of forecast and forecast accuracy, forecast error? How do you bring that into your scenarios and your decisions, what ifs that you make?
So bringing in every scenario we can to understand what's real information and what's noise when it comes to creating the forecast is critical. And once again, running multiple scenarios and multiple options and understanding where a majority of that falls, is really what it's all about these days. These times are where you really need those seasoned planners, those seasoned people, or new tools like we're talking about right now. Right?
As far as with this forecasting question, I think we've seen great responses so far. How are you handling that in, legislative AI? How are you handling the uncertainty of forecast? I mean, is it playing out multiple scenarios of forecast? Is it looking at ranges, just a range forecast? How is it bringing the uncertainty of forecast in?
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, depending on what forecast you use, let's say you have your own forecast, you have your forecast you learned at IBF, bunch of models. At the end of the day, if one thinks about doing a simulation, at any point of time, you are generating causally using historical data what your near-term future would look like. Now that future, if done right, you would not only have points forecast, but also you will have uncertainty intervals and all that stuff. So when you do simulation, you are effectively generating multiple data points out of that distribution and then carrying forward that further downstream. So really for that reason, if you're doing a simulation over, let's say, a season that's 3 months long, and you're doing it the granularity of 1 day, this grows exponentially. And for that reason, you really need doing scenario analysis at scale of 10 to the power 19 or something like that. And you can do simpler versions, but in simpler versions, what you're going to miss out on is exactly things on the margins. So if you're happy with, let's suppose, a poor forecasting, all it does is just point thing. Well, it will tell you that with this type of forecast that you're going to use day to day, here is the policy of a choice. Because you see, you cannot change your forecasting algorithm. Whatever you have, you have. Either you get new, or if you have decided this is the algorithm you're going to use, you want to do simulation with that, rather than sort of simulating with something new algorithm that's out there. And so wrapping up your answer to your question, Eric, use whatever forecast you have, and that would generate, depending on more complex forecast, lots of scenarios, depending on very simple forecast, simple scenarios. But for each of those things, you will produce the right chart.
Okay, so kind of a follow-up question to that then. I mean, a lot of people looking at simple statistical type time series modeling, they have order history, supply, demand history. That's not, you don't really get many probabilistic type of outputs from that type of data and that type of modeling. Can you look at just past bit of the air or something of that sort and extrapolate that out? I mean, how are you taking in some of that basic time series statistical type modeling and utilizing that to extrapolate to probabilities and risk?
Great. So again, whatever forecasting model you want to use in the simulation, hypothetically, you plug it into the simulator. And now I think we're getting into the mechanics of how the tool and the platform works. But let me just keep it at an academic level. You take an input of forecasting, whatever model you have certain understanding of your rules, dynamics, and whatnot. You have information about, for example, historical purchase orders and when the shipment happened, all of that stuff. You put all of that stuff in one place, whatever you have. And based on that, you do best faithful simulation. Okay. And what it reflects is, as a decision maker, as a planner, whatever information you're going to use, only that information, based on that, you're doing scenario analysis, no more, no less.
What if? There's so many different drivers. There's so many things I could bring in. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. There's so many different things. How do you decide on the subset of what you're going to look at, what you're going to bring into scenarios, what you're going to bring into what ifs? Because I mean, you could bring in everything, and it's going to be, paralysis by analysis type of thing. What do you exactly bring in?
Well, if you use the model we were just showed, that was just demonstrated, you bring it all in, but that's not always capable, right? But in kind of jesting, but not, that's where these things do give us that opportunity. But at the end of the day, there are definitely causal inputs that are going to move the needle, right? There are things that we know significantly that could move the needle. And I think it's important that we run those scenarios. And it's not a sprint, but it's a marathon, right? The goal is over time to you want to do economic modeling, you want to do regression analysis, you want to do the math, the statistics to see what really has an impact on your forecast, over time. But I think initially we go and we all know the major drivers, right? We all know some of those major drivers, and it's important that we utilize those. But it's also important that when we really get near the end of the tail, we cut off that tail. And at that point, the diminishing returns, it's just not going to mathematically make any difference.
When you're looking at these scenarios, when you start adding more and more features or adding in more and more drivers, it seems like you could get longer and longer in your planning cycles. Does this lend itself to agility? And I mean, because business is changing pretty quickly. How do you bring in this to respond to what's happening yesterday?
Yeah, I get to give my favorite answer to that type of a question. It depends, right? So
Hey, that's my answer.
I learned it from you. So one of the ways to tackle this though is look, there's not one answer for every item in your portfolio, right? You've got to look at your portfolio of what you're actually selling if it's a hard good and say they behave in certain ways, and how do you tier or group those items? Because there are some things, go back to your grocery store now, right? Your bread and your milk probably sell about the same way almost all the time. We all have a core of our business that we probably spend more time than we need to trying to plan it, when in fact the consumer is going to plan it for us and they're going to buy it, and we're going to see the sales and we're going to plan it forward. And usually it's more stable, and it's something that you probably don't need to do quite as much depth and analytics on. And sometimes that sounds counterintuitive because people say, well, no, these are my most important items. I have to spend more time. No, not necessarily. Not if your data is good, if you know what's going on and it's predictable. Some of your more basic time series can handle that. In the retail setting, most of the time what we do is we take our items that are seasonally important and we say, this is going to live for 12 weeks, right? And when you have an item that's going to live for 12 weeks, when you have that type of tiering and you say, we know this is a 12 week, this is an 8 week, whatever it might be, you do need to then do some form of root cause on when those items succeed or fail. Because it's one thing to have scenarios based on data, but data is data. Data is not necessarily smart on its own. Data offers insights, right? So if you have the data and then you know, okay, I see a spike in sales. That's great. I'm going to plan that next year. Well, guess what? You just planned something that you might have said, well, I got to dump this product because it arrived late to store, so I had to discount it right away or sooner than I wanted to. That's just real retail behavior, right? So you need to understand why things happen.
On this one, when you're looking at bringing in a lot of these inputs into our scenarios, we have forecast uncertainty, we have supply uncertainty, we have lead time uncertainty. Everything has uncertainty in it nowadays. So we're bringing in all these.
Yeah,
I know. This is the life you live. I know. So we're bringing all these. It's great to say, yeah, here's what we know could happen. What's the biggest impact on focusing on fixing things and improving things? Is it forecast? Do I want to improve my forecast? Is it supply? Is it my lead times? Where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck on fixing and on focusing on some of these outputs?
I'll make it kind of simple. The thing that hits the production the hardest is forecast bias. And if you're consistently under forecasting and then wanting more product down the road with these extended lead times, you're causing lots of trouble. If you're over forecasting, once again, I think I'd kind of rather be there, but once again, that costs you money, right? That's building inventory. So having a great forecast, over whatever time frame, month to month, is wonderful. But when you put it all together, are you biased one way or another? Because that bias to me, is the most expensive and has significant impacts on organizations.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Joe, there's a soft problem when it comes to bias too. You get some of this that starts up in your organization, which you don't need, right? When one part, you need to be able to factually show, no, you tend to lead us down the wrong path by being too optimistic or too pessimistic. Do it gingerly, obviously, so you can keep your partners. But I do think there's a hard cost and a soft cost to that. It's a great call out.
Yeah, and just to clarify, by bias, I mean you're either always over forecasting or you're always under forecasting.
Being we're talking about generative AI, and I mean, obviously, Dr. Shaw's, Ikibai does some phenomenal scenario planning, does some great things for planning and forecasters to be able to really take their planning process to the next level. With that, the question I get is AI here to take over our jobs then? Is their product pretty much going to take over and make you obsolete, Joe? I mean, what do you think?
There's no making me obsolete, Eric, but the bottom line is it gives me more tools in my toolbox, right? And the importance is we learn how to use all these new tools. And it's important that as these new tools come out, that we look at organizations like IBF to teach us how to do this and to be good at that. We need to keep evolving. If we don't evolve, yeah, they can take our spots, but if we continue to evolve, because there's going to be the next generation tool. There's going to be the next generation AI that's going to continue to improve. So no, this is just an opportunity for all of us, if we raise our hands to take it, to just get better and put another tool in our toolbox. So once again, it will only take our jobs if we allow it to take our jobs. But on the other side, I think it can extend our jobs and our abilities to our companies.
I know, Todd, you're hoping it takes your job. No such luck. So
Yeah. Count on you, Dr. Shah. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you totally, Joe. This is a new toolkit, but I guess I'd answer a little differently in that I think a certain number of our jobs theoretically go away, because this is about doing more with less. Because I do think it allows fewer people to focus more on decision making. Now, those people need to really understand what the toolkit is doing, though. The last thing you want is somebody coming in and say, well, it says this, so I must do that. No, because business is dysfunctional, and some of our leaders are dysfunctional, right? And leaders have bias, to Joe's point earlier, I know. And leaders will take us down paths that sometimes these types of tools in the right hands can help us avoid. So I think there's a chance to be more efficient. And I do think there probably is some kind of consequence for our numbers overall, but I think those of us that are in the chairs are going to do less clerical, less data crunching, less things that are not really quite a lot of fun, unless you're like an algorithm or something, and a lot more time talking to people and making decisions.
So finally, Dr. Shah, I mean, thank you very much for sponsoring today. Thank you for giving some great insights, teeing up this question for us to discuss. Thank you for being a sponsor for this, and it's a great product. But with that, I mean, are you here? Are you at Skynet secretly, and you're looking to take over the demand planning, or do you really see a role of demand planners still?
No, okay. I mean, I fully agree with what Joe and Todd said. I think we give too much credit. Let me put it this way: as an academic, I can say this: we give too much credit to AI and machines. Okay. Look, there was a time when we did not have washing machines, and now we have washing machines, which means that somebody is not, thankfully, washing clothes, but maybe that somebody is doing something else. Just the way Joe said, well, if you still want to continue washing clothes, I think that's a difficult job to have. As Todd said, yes, that's not a job potentially the person who is doing is enjoying it. Okay, and I fundamentally believe that AI is there to help us as humans. I mean, look, ultimate challenge and ultimate vision for AI should be is to how do we enable humans in the organization to run the organization better? No organization is defined by machines. Organizations are two things: the great mission and great people. Okay, and AI just is there to enable people to achieve their mission.